Hi, this is Pam from Hooked on Sewing. In this second project in the September Sew Along, we will be sewing the Pearl Tote Bag together. Welcome to the September Sew Along. The first thing I want to talk to you about are all the supplies and tools that you will need to complete these projects. And pretty much you'll need the same tools for each one of the projects that we're going to do in the September Sew Along. Of course, you're going to need a pair of fabric scissors. These are from Missouri Star. I happen to love these scissors. I also like to have a small pair of like embroidery scissors that I keep right by my sewing machine. Helps for trimming threads, clipping corners, things like that. You may also find a seam ripper to come in handy. And if you want to finish your seams with pinking shears, you can have those handy. That's totally optional. These are from Dime Designs and Machine Embroidery. You may also need, and I highly recommend that you use a rotary cutter with an acrylic ruler and a self-healing mat. You may also find it handy to have a way to mark your fabric, such as with this friction pen. Okay, this tool here is a Hera marker. You'll notice that it has a very, I don't know what to call this, a very flat end here, and it is used for marking fabric without using ink, water-soluble ink, or a fabric marking pen. You literally press this down on your fabric and it leaves an indentation in the fabric, and you use that as your stitch guide. So this is a Hera marker. I really like to use this when I can, and I will leave links to all the tools in the description below. You'll also need a sewing machine needle. This is just a 90-14 sewing machine needle. You can use your regular presser foot, but because we'll be dealing with multiple layers, especially if you're going to use foam in any of your projects, I find a walking foot like this AccuFeed foot for my Janome machine that comes in really handy. You'll want some clips. They would just work so much better for holding your fabric pieces together than pens sometimes. And of course, some sewing pens. You may also find it handy to have a way to flatten your seams, such as this seam roller. And you'll want to have an iron. This is the Oliso M3 Pro Project Iron. It's a mini iron. And of course, an ironing surface. I use a wool pressing mat on a table that I made. You'll need thread. Whatever your coordinating thread is, I just use a polyester thread. I like this thread by Gutermann. You can use your favorite brand of thread. Of course, you'll need your bobbin. I like to have a few of those pre-wound. You may also find it handy to have a smaller acrylic ruler. This is really my favorite size. This is a 2.5 inch by 8 inch acrylic ruler. And other than your fabric, fusible fleece. What else are we using? Fusible fleece and a lightweight fusible interfacing such as Shapeflex SF101 I like to use. I already mentioned the fusible fleece. And some of these, like if you're going to make the book sleeve so that it holds your electronic device such as your iPad, you may want to make yours with foam instead of the batting or the fusible fleece. I like to use the Flex Foam by Pellon. There are other brands, soft and stable, that you can certainly use, but they make for a nice padding, especially when you're going to be stowing away your electronic devices in one of the book sleeves. And other than your sewing machine, I think that covers it for all the tools that you'll need. Don't forget that if you're participating in the September Sew Along, that you share your progress on Facebook and Instagram so that you'll be eligible for the weekly prizes. In week 1 of our Sew Along, we sewed these Cora Book Sleeves together. This week, we're going to be sewing together the Pearl Tote Bag. Now to sew together the Pearl Tote Bag, you're just going to need fabric for your exterior, fabric for the lining, a pocket piece, and you either need to make your straps or use some cotton webbing. Let's take a look at how to put this together. So I have all my fabric pieces already cut out. So 2 pieces for my exterior that are 15 by 15 inches, 2 pieces for my lining that are 15 by 15 inches, a pocket piece that will be sewn to the lining that is 14.5 inches high by 7 inches wide. And for the straps, I'm using cotton webbing. You can make your own straps as well. And I recommend that the straps be anywhere between 22 to 28 inches long. And we are going to box the corners on this tote bag and cut out 1.5 inch corners, but we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, you will also need to cut out two 15-inch by 15-inch pieces of fusible fleece for the exterior of your bag and 2 pieces of either fusible fleece or lightweight interfacing for the lining pieces of your bag, as well as a piece of lightweight interfacing for your pocket that measures 7 inches by 7 inches. This is the pocket piece here. You can see it's 14.5 inches high by 7 inches wide. And I've just folded it in half, right sides together, so I could fuse the interfacing to the wrong side of half of that piece. This is an exterior panel where I have already fused the fusible fleece to the wrong side of my fabric. And just be sure to follow the manufacturer's instructions for whatever brand of interfacing that you're using. If you wanted, you could use a fusible foam, quilt batting, and quilt the top of the or the exterior of the bag. There's just a lot of different options. So I'm using Pellon 987F, which is the fusible fleece for my exterior pieces and my lining pieces, but that's totally up to you how thick or sturdy, not necessarily sturdy, stiff that you would like for your fabric pieces to be. Typically when you fuse the interfacing to the fabric, you lay the fused interfacing right side up, so the bumpy side up, and then you lay your fabric wrong side down on top of that, and then you press your iron, hold it in place for 10 seconds, and move it around the fabric until you have the entire piece of interfacing fused to the fabric. And you repeat the same thing for the pocket piece. If you're making straps out of fabric, you may also want to include interfacing in your straps. It just depends on the weight of the fabric that you're using for that. But for this tutorial, I'm using cotton webbing for my straps. So let's see how to put this all together. And you'll be surprised, I think, at how quickly it does sew up. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is to prepare the pocket piece that gets sewn into the lining. So we've already fused the fusible fleece to the wrong side of the pocket lining, to half of the pocket lining. And then we fold it in half, right sides together. Then I'm just going to take it to my sewing machine and we're going to sew this together. I'm going to use about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on this. I'm going to start at the folded top edge, sew down to the corner, raise my presser foot, pivot my fabric, and now I'm going to leave an opening in the bottom of this for turning. So I'll just stitch over a couple of inches, back stitch to secure my stitches, cut my thread, move it over, make sure to leave a 2 to 3 inch opening for turning, back stitch to reinforce my stitches, stitch to the corner just 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch away, pivot, and then stitch up to the other edge. And again, you want to back stitch to secure those stitches in place. And then we're just going to clip our corners here to reduce the bulk in the seams, just straight across. It's kind of hard to see in this video because I'm using white thread on white fabric, but just be sure not to clip through your stitching. And then I'm also going to clip the top where the fold is, where that stitch is, just at an angle towards the stitching. Again, it just helps to reduce the bulk. And then through that opening, we'll turn the pocket piece right side out. Then I'm going to use this bone folder tool to just help me push out the corners. You could use the end of a pencil, like the eraser end of a pencil, mechanical pencil, crochet, hook the end of that, whatever will help you to push out those corners nice and flat. Then I'm going to push my seam allowances towards the wrong side or the inside of that pocket piece, and then just pin or clip that opening closed. Now we'll close that opening when we attach the pocket to the lining piece. So take one of your lining pieces, which would be the inside back of the tote bag, and lay it face up. Lay your pocket piece on top, and we're going to measure. So I'm centering my pocket piece on the lining piece, lining it up. I'm using my acrylic ruler as a guide. So I'm going, 2.5 inches down from the top, and then I'm centering it, 4.5, 5 inches from each side. You just want that pocket piece to be nice and centered, and then I'm just going to pin it in place at the corners. Okay, and then we're ready to stitch the pocket to the lining piece. Okay, so I've taken this to my sewing machine, and I'm going to start at the top right side edge of the pocket. Line up my presser foot close to the edge, just right with the edge of the pocket piece. And if you have the ability to move your needle to further to the right so you get 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, that would be great. But otherwise, just stitch as close to that edge as you can, removing your pins as you go. When you get to a corner, you'll do the same thing as you do on all corners. You'll stop with your needle down, raise your presser foot, rotate or pivot your fabric, stitch to the other end. This is going to stitch that opening closed in our pocket. And then when we get to the next corner, we will stop with our needle down, raise our presser foot, rotate our fabric counterclockwise, and stitch to the top of the pocket. Now when we get to the end of the pocket, the top of it actually, we're going to stitch past that pocket piece, just a couple of stitches, back stitch, then forward stitch again, a couple. This will help relieve the stress on the top of the pocket and secure it nicely to the lining piece. All right, next we're going to sew our two lining pieces together. So leave your lining piece with the pocket laying face right side up, and then we're going to take the other lining piece and lay it right side down so the two right sides are facing one another. We're going to line up the top, side, and bottom edges and then pin or clip those in place. We're just going to be stitching along the side, across the bottom, leaving an opening for turning, and then continue across the bottom and up the side. We're not going to be stitching across the top. So once we have it all pinned or clipped, remember we're going to start at the top, stitch down all along the side, across the bottom, leaving an opening for turning, and up the other side. So let's take this to our sewing machine. All right, we're going to start at the top, back stitch to reinforce our stitches, and stitch all the way down the side. We're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Just remove your clips or pins as you go. Remember, when you get to the corner, we're going to stop a 1/2 inch away from the edge with our needle down. We'll raise our presser foot, rotate our fabric, lower the presser foot, and continue sewing. And remember to leave an opening for turning the bag. When we get to the next corner, we'll stop with our needle in the down position, rotate our fabric, and continue sewing up the other side. When we get to the top, we're going to back stitch to secure our stitches. And next, we'll repeat that same process with our exterior bag pieces. But first, we need to attach our handles or our straps. Now, like I said, I'm using cotton webbing, and I've cut mine, I think they were 26 inches long, but you can cut yours whatever length you want. I recommend between 22 and 28 inches. Now, you want to center these straps or handles on your bag. I'm going 3.5 inches over from the edge and then placing my strap, clipping it in place along the top of the exterior bag piece. I'll measure the other side, make sure it's 3.5 inches, and then pin or clip my strap in place. And make sure your strap isn't twisted, and then you'll do the same thing for the other exterior fabric piece. And remember, I've already fused the interfacing to these pieces, and now I'm ready to sew them together. But first, I'm going to baste the straps to the bags so I can get rid of these clips and it will hold them in place. Okay, I'll repeat that for each end of the strap. So 4 times you will baste the strap to the exterior fabric pieces. And again, I have the outer edge of my strap lined up 3.5 inches from the edge of the fabric. All right, now that we have our straps basted to the exterior fabric pieces, we're going to stitch the exterior pieces together. So lay one of those pieces right side up. Make sure you have the straps at the top on both pieces so that you're sewing your exterior bag piece together properly. Line up your edges and pin or clip in place. Although we're not stitching across the top yet, I'm just putting pins or clips there just to keep everything lined up properly. And I will continue putting my clips along the side and across the bottom. Now, when we stitch the exterior pieces together, we'll start at the top, just like we did with the lining piece. We're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We'll secure our stitches at the beginning by back stitching. We'll stitch down to the corner. We'll rotate our fabric just like normal, and we're going to stitch completely across the bottom. There's no need to leave an opening for turning because we're going to use the opening in the lining piece. So again, we're going to take this over to our sewing machine, and we're just going to stitch along the side, across the bottom, and up the other side for the exterior bag piece. All right, once we have that stitched together, we're going to take it back over to my cutting surface, and I'm going to measure out 1.5 inches from the seams, not from the edge of the fabric, but from the seam, from the side seam and the bottom seam. I'm lining up my ruler so that the 1.5 inches are laying on the stitch lines and not the edge of the fabric. Then I'm taking my friction marking pen and marking a square. Again, I will repeat that for the other edge of the exterior fabric piece, and I'll also do that for, here I'm not doing it right. Um, I'll fix that in a minute. That should be 1.5, not 2.5 inches. There we go. So 1.5 inch on each corner of the exterior fabric pieces, and then I will also mark the lining pieces 1.5 inch we're going to cut out these squares and box our corners next. So again, we're going to cut out each one of these corners that we just drew the squares. So just take your scissors and cut along the marked 1.5 inch square line. Right, next we are going to box our corners. So take one of the corners that you just cut the square from, and then we're going to kind of use our fingers to press open the bottom seam and the side seam, and we're going to line up the center of those seams and then clip those in place. And we want that edge to be nice and straight and flat. So make sure to clip or pin however many times you need to keep that all together. Now that we have the exterior corners all cut and pinned and lined up, we're ready to do the lining pieces. So we'll repeat this. Find the corner, open up the bottom seam, just kind of finger press it. Same with the side seams, line those seams up and clip or pin them in place together. Repeat that with the other corner. Smooth them out so they're nice and straight. And also clip those together. Once we have all the corners pinned or clipped in place, we're going to take it to our sewing machine and again use a 1/2 inch seam allowance and stitch those corner seams and stitch those corner pieces together where we cut out the square. Be sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end. That helps to secure your stitches. Once you do one corner, you'll just repeat it with the other 3 corners. All right, I'm stitching up my last corner, my last box corner. Again, back stitching at the beginning and end to secure my stitches. All right, I'm going to turn my exterior bag piece so that it is right side out, and I'm going to place it inside the lining pieces. So the right sides of the fabrics will be facing one another. The lining piece should have the fusible fleece on the outside. Make sure you get your handles or your straps down in there. Again, we're going to open up our side seams on the exterior fabric piece, kind of finger press it open, and then line it up with the side seam of our lining piece. And we'll kind of finger press that open too, and then we will pin or clip those seams in place. All right, so just line up the other side seam, clip it in place, and then we're going to put clips or pins all the way around the perimeter of the top edge of the exterior fabric and the lining pieces, securing those 2 pieces together, making sure the raw edges are lined up, and then we'll take these over to our sewing machine and do a 1/2 inch seam around the entire perimeter of the top of the bag. Now, when I stitch this, I'm going to stitch back and forth over each of the straps a couple of times. That will help to secure the straps in place. Okay, so I have removed the arm off of, or the extension table off of my sewing machine so that I have the arm, which is a narrower place that I can sew. And I have my bag laying, or that arm kind of inserted inside my bag. And then I'm just going to stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance around the entire perimeter of the bag. And I don't think I mentioned, but I use probably a 2.0 millimeter stitch length when I'm doing this, and I'm just going to stitch around the perimeter. When you get to a side seam, make sure those are laying nice and flat, that they're open and laying nice and flat, and that they're lined up. Just keep your raw edges at the top also lined up. Remove any pins or clips as you sew, and then be sure to back stitch over the straps a couple of times. So back stitch all the way across, forward, back, forward, like that on each one of the straps, just to get that securely attached to your bag. All right, once we're finished sewing the top of the bag's pieces together, we're going to take through the opening in the lining and pull the exterior fabric right side out, pull the lining piece right side out. Just gently pull and tug until you get everything turned so that it's facing right side out. And then while you have the bag like this, I like to take my bone folder, my hand, some kind of tool, insert it inside the lining of the bag through that opening down into the corners and just push those out so they're nice and smooth, the corners and the seams. Okay, so I'm just using my hand to push those out. Then I'm going to take the lining piece where that opening is and turn the opening, the seam allowance towards the inside, and clip those in place so that I can stitch that shut. Now you can stitch this by hand and use a blind stitch so that the stitch is invisible. I usually just use my sewing machine. So once I have this edge all folded back inside and clipped in place just where I want it, everything is nice and smooth, I'll take it to my sewing machine and I'll stitch as close to the edge, maybe 1/8 of an inch or less away from the edge, and just back stitch, stitch across the opening, back stitch to secure my stitches, and then trim any threads. So like I said, I'm just stitching this closed using a very narrow seam. I'm going to back stitch when I get to the end of this just to secure my stitches. And then I'm going to take my scissors and trim off any longer pieces of threads. And now we're ready to use my hand to stuff my lining back inside the exterior bag piece. And then I'll take my hand and kind of fingers and just kind of finger press the seam up at the top so it's nice and flat. And so those side seams are open and flat, and then I'm going to clip all around the top edge so we can do some top stitching. Right, I'm going to change out my top thread just so that it matches my exterior bag piece. I typically just stitch with white polyester thread, but because this stitching will be showing, I want it to match the bag. So I'm switching over to a green thread in my top thread. I'm leaving the bottom white because I have a white lining. So I'll place my bag on my sewing machine. Again, I have the extension table removed and I'm just stitching using my arm. I'm going to back stitch to secure that stitch. I'm going to use a longer stitch length, 3.0, 3.5 millimeter. Again, I'll stitch one row that is about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and then I'll stitch a second row of top stitching that is about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. I just think that double row of stitching, it not only secures the seam allowance along the top edge of the bag, but it gives it a really nice finished look. So I like to do 2 rows. You can do 1, you can do 3, whatever you think looks appropriate for your project. So again, I'm doing a second row of top stitching around the top of the tote bag. I'm using a 3.0 millimeter stitch length, 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and stitching around the entire perimeter of the tote bag. Then when I get done, I will take my scissors and snip away any thread ends. Make sure your side seams are nice and flat. You can kind of feel with your fingers and before you sew over those. And believe it or not, we are all done sewing this pearl tote bag. And this is my finished bag. There are many different options for sewing this bag, and I have included those in the printed instructions. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video, and be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and come over to Hooked on Sewing and subscribe to my newsletter if you haven't already. Thank you. Right, this tutorial is part of the September Sew Along. I have other videos and patterns available in the Sew Along, including the supply and tools list, the Cora Book Sleeve. The second project is the Pearl Tote Bag that we did today, and the next project will be our Patchwork Christmas Stocking. So if you haven't signed up for the Sew Along, please do that as well. I'll leave a link in the description below. Thank you.